Hello and welcome into the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. I'm National Recruiting Analyst Cooper Petagna alongside 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting Andrew Ivins and National Recruiting Analyst Tom Loy, which it's Wednesday. You know what that means. Tom has the fresh intel. We'll get to that in a minute. And also Chris Hummer, 24/7 Sports' very own. He put out a top 100 true freshmen potential impact players. You can find that on 247sports.com. Drew, I think for you and I, we love those type of lists, 100 deep, every school really at the power forward level in the FBS. You get to see a lot of different faces, a lot of different names that could make a potential day one impact. But boys, we are pretty excited. All three of us will be going to LA next week. And Tom, I believe you are setting it up, my friend. Big time up there. Tell the viewers what we got planned out.
Yeah, we are going to sneak out a little bit early on a day we don't have anything until later that evening, and we are going to play some Los Angeles Country Club. Fired up with to join you guys out there. It's going to be a lot of fun, but we got set up. I thought it was going to be a once in a lifetime experience. It's going to be a twice in a lifetime experience. Get to play the South Course this time, so fired up, man. It's going to be an experience.
Is Cooper frozen?
Cooper looks frozen. I've never seen him look better. Ivins, how we feeling on your end, man?
Doing good, man. I am doing good. Wanted to get you on the show today, right? Recruiting's in full swing. I think we've had close to 24 top 247 commitments here over the past, really 4 or 5 days. And let's start at the top, man. Me and you were both out in Tampa for the OT7 finals. The alpha dog, the guy on the top of my list for the dream team, Duce Knight, the Notre Dame quarterback commit. He looked excellent, I think, all 3 days. One of the most consistent performances we have seen from him in this type of setting. He heads into the Elite 11 finals next week. Duce Knight, I think the other story coming out of the OT7 finals, it sounds like Ole Miss is involved to some degree. So I'm going to toss it to you. I mean, what do we need to know? Is this smoke surrounding the Rebels and Duce Knight, the in-state prospect, real? Or should Notre Dame be feeling good?
There's absolutely smoke to Ole Miss and Duce Knight. There's no question about it. It just is what it is. It's a fact of the situation. We talked about Alabama. We talked about Ole Miss. Notre Dame's got some competition to keep him in the fold. And like you said, Duce Knight was outstanding at the OT7. He was your alpha dog. I think he was a no-brainer for everybody in attendance. But look, man, he is an elite talent from Mississippi right there essentially in the backyard for the Rebels. And they have a vacancy at quarterback in 2025, and he is the guy. There is not a run of a couple guys to watch. It is all about Duce Knight for Ole Miss. So it's actually funny. Whenever I tweet something about Ole Miss, when I tweet something about Duce Knight and Notre Dame or the alpha dog, things like that, there's always some Ole Miss staffers that seem to like that or retweet it behind the scenes. So it's kind of Notre Dame fans want to call it trolling, whatever the case may be, but it's genuine. Ole Miss badly wants to land him. They have a great relationship with him and Knight and multiple guys on staff. So my gut feeling is that Duce Knight will eventually take a visit to Ole Miss. It'll probably take place sometime this fall. But in the end, I do see him sticking with Notre Dame. I think he's got a tremendous relationship with Marcus Freeman, Gino Guidugli, Mike Denbrock, and really the entire class in 2025 headed to play for Marcus Freeman in South Bend. So strong ties there. It's not going to be easy to flip him, but there's something special there in his mind between him and Ole Miss. It's always going to be there in his heart. But I do think the family kind of prefers Notre Dame, which is a little strange with them being in Mississippi. But in the end, I think he sticks to Notre Dame, but I'm not ready to call this one a done deal quite yet.
Is he the type of kid? Obviously, we're in this new era of recruiting. A lot of off-field factors go into these decisions, but for him, is it like going to be on-field results? I mean, I think you bring up Notre Dame, you bring up Ole Miss, both those teams, you look at the Las Vegas odds, could potentially be in the college football playoff, and you can even make a case that they're favorites to make the postseason. Do you think Knight is going to have his eye on that specifically?
Without question. I think it's very important to him. I think he wants to see how the guys at the quarterback position develop. I think he wants to see how Mike Denbrock looks as the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame rather than, the star of the show at LSU. So a lot to be determined. He wants to see what Ole Miss does. I mean, there's a lot of chatter about Lane Kiffin every year in and year out with him and other programs. So That's another thing that he's going to be watching. Does he want to play for the same head coach for all 3 to 4 years when he's in college? There's always chat about Marcus Freeman and other schools, which I don't really buy much into, but I expect he's going to be at Notre Dame for a very long time. So a lot of factors in play. It's a long way from December, from when he decides to sign and early enroll. So again, I think it's going to be Notre Dame, but I'm not ready to call it a done deal. I'm not ready to completely close the book yet. And I don't think Duce Knight is. I think he wants to let his process play out. It'll be, in my opinion, just Notre Dame or Ole Miss, but time will tell.
Was that the worst timed computer update of all time?
Not great.
I had no idea what was happening there. As we're starting the show, I mean, my screen evaporated, fell into a deep black void. Happy to be back on the show. It sounds like you guys got started without me. Little Ty Hawkins, little Duce Knight. Drew.
Let's jump back to Ty Hawkins.
Yeah, we didn't get to Ty Hawkins.
Oh, we didn't get into Ty Hawkins.
Yeah,
okay.
I wasn't ready to step in and pinch hit. I didn't even have the rundown in front of me. I just knew Duce Knight was at the top.
I appreciate the versatility, being able to step in. That's what it's all about. I was getting ready to get Wally Pipp there, but let's start from the top. Let's start with TCU commit Ty Hawkins, number 200 player in the country, number 15 quarterback. SMU in here making some noise. They're back on the market after Keelan Russell has flipped to Alabama. Tom, what are you hearing here?
Shout out to Mike Roach. He was all over this big news for 24/7 Sports and first reported it, I believe, on Monday. So, I've gotten to know Ty Hawkins really well throughout this process. One thing's for sure, he loves TCU. Big fan of the Horned Frogs, fired up about his future there. But his process is not completely shut down. And to be honest, there's nothing wrong with that. He's earned the right to talk to other schools, get to know other coaches, hear their pitch, see what they have to say about his future. So SMU opened up with the departure of Keelan Russell, who headed off to Alabama. He's had good communication with the staff for a long time. And honestly, this goes beyond SMU. I think he's still talking to Oregon. There's potential for that visit to take place sooner rather than later before he completely shuts down his process. So, like we said with Duce Knight and Notre Dame, there's competition there. And SMU, Oregon, they're battling for the current TCU commit. So there's a lot left to be playing out. The dominoes are going to continue to fall. And to be honest, when it comes to Duce Knight, Ty Hawkins, there's so much movement at the quarterback position we see year in and year out. So these guys are going to reach out to new targets. And I'm sure we haven't seen the last between Ty Hawkins, SMU, TCU, Oregon, and probably a few other schools before all is said and done.
Drew, I didn't think that the domino effect of Keelan Russell would then come back and kind of affect Ty Hawkins, but here we are. You got Will Stein at Oregon, Rhett Lashley at SMU, a guy that you really respect, Kendall Briles, Sonny Dykes certainly going to have their say at the end of it. They've done a good job at the quarterback position. We liked Hoss Haney last year as well. It is pretty interesting. He seems to be the guy that teams that in the upper echelon that don't have a signal caller yet are kind of coming back to and kind of saying, all right, are you available to kind of look around a little bit? SMU is kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, proactive recruiting, that was where my mind went when Keelan flipped to Alabama. Okay, what's SMU going to do? We know about them moving to the ACC, the money that's invested in that program, the money that's invested in those players. You knew Rhett Lashley was going to have something up his sleeve, and I saw all this play out firsthand over the weekend in terms of Ty Hawkins telling Mike Roach, all right, I'm probably going to visit SMU. I believe Ty's sister just graduated from SMU, so he's familiar with the campus. And then you mentioned Oregon. It just goes with the theme, right? Elite 11 finals next week. All these quarterbacks, there's a select few that feel kind of locked in. I mean, we got Julian Lewis in USC. Now we got Ty Hawkins. We got Duce Knight. The list just seems to go on and on. But I would love him in Rhett Lashley's offense there in Dallas. He's a guy that can be a high-volume passer. I think he's got a great deep ball. Needs to cut down on the mistakes. I think the final game of his junior season there in San Antonio, 6 interceptions. We saw some turnover-worthy throws over the weekend at OT7, but he's a dynamic athlete, one of the top rushers when we talk about these quarterbacks, close to 2,000 career yards on the ground, excellent in the track and field. He's going to be a fun player wherever he goes.
Tom, let's talk a little bit about Clemson, and obviously high school recruiting is very important for Clemson, especially the quarterback position as well. Brady Hart, 2026, right? This is a guy that has gotten a lot of attention. Number 144 player in the country, number 9 signal caller. Crystal ball to Clemson. Is that correct?
Clemson is absolutely the team to beat right now. I feel great about my pick. I know Notre Dame and Florida were very much involved, but they have since landed 2026 quarterbacks and Noah Grubbs and Will Griffin. So they moved on. Brady Hart moved on. The Tigers in a really good spot right now, but he maintains that he wants to take his time throughout the process and not make a decision until after this season. So the longer that goes, I mean, it could prove costly, and maybe Clemson moves on to another target and fills up their spot, but it's just kind of is what it is. Hart, getting to know him throughout the process, he's a one and done kind of guy. And when I say that, when he commits, his recruitment is over. A lot of guys want to be wishy-washy, and we've talked about guys that have been committed at the quarterback position, and they're going to be talking to other schools. That is absolutely not in Brady Hart's DNA, not what he wants to do. He's focused on finding the right fit the first time and being done with it. So wants to be patient, develop relationships, develop connections, and then commit when he's ready. So Clemson leads now, but they could absolutely, see things shake up with Nebraska jumping in with an offer. Michigan's in there. He likes Joe Sloan at LSU a lot. Ohio State is probably my dark horse. If they decide to offer, make a push, make a run at him, I could see the Buckeyes being a big player here. But right now, it's all Clemson. They had a great visit. Big fan of this connection as well.
Drew, I got a question for you. Garrett Riley, you would think when he got hired by Clemson from TCU, coming off the heels of a national championship, it was like the coup for Dabo Swinney. I think a lot of people thought, all right, Dabo Swinney's kind of turning over a new leaf. He's got this new staff. We've seen him kind of be a little bit more aggressive with the staff turnover. And, you look at Clemson, what they've done at the quarterback position outside of Cade Klubnik, who's still trying to figure it out. You got Christopher Vizina, Blake Hebert as well. What do you think so far? I don't know about you. I kind of expected more overall, just in terms of the type of talent he would be able to attract to Clemson.
I would agree. A bit underwhelming, I think. And, Blake Hebert's a guy that missed a good chunk of his junior season and got to see him throw out the Elite 11 regional there in State College. I see the vision with him. I don't know if he is a fighter pilot for the position right now. We'll get the senior year. We're not going to get him at the Elite 11 finals. So to me, I've been wondering what is Dabo going to do at quarterback in 2026? And, Clemson is very big on the camp evaluations, especially at that quarterback position. You want an offer from the Tigers, you got to throw for them. And last week I saw the list of arms expected to throw. And to me, I mean, I've watched a lot of 2026 quarterbacks. I thought it was, again, underwhelming. And the next thing you know, Brady Hart pops up out of nowhere, throws, I think, on Thursday, is offered on Saturday when me and Tom are watching the Florida Panthers go 1-0 at the bar. Tom got the call. He instantly put the crystal ball pick. And I told Tom right then, I think this is the best option for the Tigers. Given the dominoes that have already fallen in the 2026 cycle, I never thought I'd say this. It seems like if you want a 2026 quarterback, kind of everything goes through Florida, at least in the 2026 cycle. I mean, you said it, Noah Grubbs, Will Griffin, both those guys are Florida kids. You also got Dia Bell. I think Brady Hart fits what Dabo in that program. And I think if they can get him, I would feel better about the long-term outlook of that quarterback room.
That position, it's obviously the most important position on the field, and for good reason. But you think about Clemson, you think about Deshaun Watson, you think about Trevor Lawrence, the success that they've had there, and those two guys tied to their national championship title runs. Do they have that guy in their room right now? You throw in the new age of college football, the transfer portal, and NIL, it makes Clemson really one of the most polarizing programs in the country when it comes to roster building, that type of conversation. Drew, I don't know if they have that dude. That's a discussion for another time, but who's that guy that's going to put them over the top? We know they like to build through the high school ranks. Player development, obviously a big key to their program as well. So we'll keep an eye on Clemson. And speaking of, I guess we're not done with them, but Cortez Mills, one of our favorite guys, top 200 receiver in the country per 24/7 Sports, number 20 receiver overall. Tom, you fired in a crystal ball for Clemson as well.
I made my flip from Miami. That was where my crystal ball pick initially landed, and I moved on to Clemson. They could not have done a better job during that official visit. I was told to crystal ball him to the Tigers immediately after he left campus, but I decided to hold off. I knew I was going to see him at the OT7 championship in Tampa, and he made it very clear on the record and off that Clemson was his leader. I feel great about the pick as of today. However, just going to be honest, in this day and age, anything is possible. Anything could change. Like I said, my original pick was on Miami, and they get the last crack at him. So that's going to be huge, especially with the fact that he's likely going to commit in July. So while I like the Tigers today, the Hurricanes are very much in play. And let's be honest, in this day and age, with NIL being a factor, that is absolutely heavily weighing in favor of Miami right now. So just to be completely candid, from what I've gathered, Clemson might need to pick things up a little bit. Andrew said it earlier when we were speaking before the show, like in traditional recruiting, this is probably something where I throw the pick in for Clemson. I feel great about it, and nothing's going to change that. But NIL being a factor and knowing how well Miami does things and how big of a priority he is for the Hurricanes, Miami is far from out of this. They are not playing games when it comes to this recruit and this recruitment in general. So keep an eye on the Canes. There could be some more crystal ball moving forward. But right now, heading into this decision in July, I really, really like Clemson.
Drew, any thoughts on this particular recruitment? Because it seems like Clemson and Miami couldn't be any more different than how they kind of go about their business. And Tom called it, modern day college football. It is one of those things you kind of see, like traditional recruitment. Yeah, maybe this is the best place for me, but we don't live in a traditional world anymore. That's kind of what gives Miami the opening here.
Yeah, and he's not the only receiver I've heard that kind of feedback from when it comes to, all right, visited the Tigers, now is still kind of exploring his options, maybe even though that prospect feels like Clemson would be the best fit for them. Also visited Florida, I think Nebraska, and I am not Tom Loy. I think they were kind of a team to also watch in that recruitment. He's got, I think his former head coach there is on staff in Lincoln. We only got one day of Cortez Mills at the OT7 finals, but he saw a high volume of targets come his way. Productive in Florida's highest classification. I think he would be a nice addition for the Tigers, especially when you think about what they took last cycle. TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco. They need to rebuild that wide receiver room. This is a guy that can play on the inside. He can get open. One to track, but this is like the new age recruiting. It's just we fast forwarded it to right here real fast.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with Cortez Mills. Obviously, Clemson in a spot right now. They need a signal caller, receiver. They need to continue to add talent. They did a great job of that last year. TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco, both those guys should be able to contribute early for the Tigers next year. Let's get back to USC. We talked about Hayden Lowe yesterday on the podcast, but they're also in good shape, the Trojans are, with Floyd Boucard, number 42 defensive lineman. Tom, what are you hearing on that one?
Well, it looks like he's set for a commitment in July, and it wouldn't shock me at all if the Miami native by way of Canada eventually picked USC sooner rather than later. It may not run all the way out to July. I was told USC did an excellent job during his official visit this past weekend. They're the leader. I've been told that by multiple people, and from what I gathered, he expressed that openly to the USC staff. So barring some misdirection or misleading, the staff, all signs point toward Floyd Boucard ending up in Los Angeles with the Trojans. But you got to keep an eye on Miami, Oklahoma, Alabama's also in play. So he's got those trips lined up from Norman and Tuscaloosa before he completely shuts down his process. At least that's the plan as of today. But USC is in a very good spot.
Drew, talk to me about this kid. I'm looking at his profile. I haven't watched him yet, but originally from Canada, grew up playing hockey. Big old cat, 6'3", 315. Seems like your type of dude, man. Interesting background here.
Yeah, well, Tom also left out how he played last season in Mobile in Alabama. He's been all over the place, and now he's at Miami Central, a program that has churned out some pass rushers in recent years. Reuben Bain. I think you got to keep an eye on Miami, but Floyd Boucard, the player, twitched up interior rusher. And if USC does get a commitment from him, right, I think it's adding insurance to that defensive line class that they already have committed. We brought it up with Hayden Lowe, adding another difference maker potentially in the trenches. We'll see if they can hold on to Isaiah Gibson and Justice Terry, but they need to get these guys as they move into the Big Ten, a line of scrimmage league. So I didn't think they would go all the way to Miami. Coop, you always bring up, hey, where does USC find that mass? Where do they find those guys that can get after the quarterback? Well, it looks like at Miami Central, even though it's an international prospect.
Yeah, and sometimes I think maybe that kind of comes into it. We saw with Lucas Simmons, he ended up at Florida State, right? But was heavily involved with the Trojans. You think some of those guys, big brand like USC, a lot of eyeballs on the Trojans, especially for these guys growing up. Tom, just I know Kane's Cat, one of our loyal listeners in the chat, was asking Hayden Lowe, who's just fresh off a commitment to USC. Just in terms of the status there, I mean, do you see that one as let's categorize it as a soft commitment, or is this one that you feel pretty confident about sticking long term with USC?
It seems like it's a done deal. He always kind of gave those West Coast vibes, so people were watching Washington, USC, UCLA, and Miami was absolutely a big factor in this one. But it seemed like this USC visit was a game changer. I think it's to be determined whether the Miami smoke was real or if it was trying to get people more excited about the Hurricanes, only to eventually pick the Trojans. But it seems like USC is going to be able to hold on and keep this one committed for the long term. Obviously, fall comes and he decides, hey, I need to take a trip to Coral Gables. Anything's off the table. But for right now, and checking with people following this weekend, it seems like USC is in a really good spot to keep him for the long term.
All right, so USC getting some good news. We will talk about LSU right here. And Damian Shanklin from Indiana, number 48 player in the country, number 5 edge. Pretty interesting. Drew, this kind of has like Brian Kelly first year feel going all the way up to Indiana. He is set to announce August 29th. Tom, what are you hearing with him and the Tigers?
It's been a pretty wild recruitment for him. And initially, Notre Dame was the leader. They were the team to beat. Then you had Ohio State entering the race. That was the dream offer he always wanted. He's fresh off a visit to Columbus. But my crystal ball is on LSU. I feel great about the Tigers at this point. They seem to be the one at the top of his leaderboard. Ohio State, absolutely in play. We'll see if they can shake things up moving forward, leading up to that decision that I believe was initially supposed to be in July, but now it's in August. So he's still got visits to Tennessee and Alabama on the docket. But like I said before with one of the other prospects, barring a change of heart or him completely misleading a staff at this point, or him deciding I want to go elsewhere, it seems like LSU is the expected landing spot for him, and that would be a huge, huge pickup for Brian Kelly and his staff.
Drew, what do you think, Damian Shanklin? The first thing that comes to my mind, and I should have done a little bit more research on this, but what type of scheme is Blake Baker cooking up in Baton Rouge? Because if it's a 4 down front, I kind of struggle to see where Damian Shanklin kind of fits in. If it's a 3-4, I think he's kind of more natural there. So just your thoughts on kind of what that fit would look like in Baton Rouge.
I think they just need him regardless. I wouldn't worry about this. Yes, it'd be fun to kind of picture him in a 3-4 or whatever. Like, look, LSU needs pass rushers, right? We just saw them try to go in the transfer portal. We saw Brian Kelly's comments about the value of guys. And Tom brought up another team, Ohio State. They're kind of in the same boat. Like, where is that game-changing pass rusher that is in their class? And I think that's kind of been the theme the past few cycles. You take Damian Shanklin, to me, an outsider looking at this, knowing what both schools have on the roster, knowing what's available in the transfer portal, like this kid, he's going to get his in terms of all the off-field negotiations, because both these programs need him as these edges continue to fly off the board. LSU has circled them. Ohio State has circled them. It's going to be a battle for both those programs. I've heard some LSU smoke as well, but I do think it is kind of notable he pushed back that commitment data in an entire month.
All right, Tom. A lot of people on this show, they've been waiting for this one. Notre Dame heavily involved with one of the best linebackers in the country, number 123 overall, number 16 linebacker, Madden Faremo from California. Decision coming soon. Is that correct?
Seems like it. This one's been a battle between Notre Dame, Ohio State, Texas, USC, and Washington. He was first at Washington. Then he made his way to Notre Dame, and I eventually put in a crystal ball pick that I did not expect to do, at least at this point in his process. And I have him going to the Fighting Irish. He's still got trips on the books for Ohio State and Texas. But I'm told the Ohio State trip is not going to happen. And I think that one's no longer taking place this weekend. And up next after that, unless he decides to schedule something for this weekend in replace of that trip to Columbus, it seems like next weekend's trip to Texas is the only one still scheduled. So all that said, feel good about the Notre Dame crystal ball at this point. Great visit. Connected really well with Marcus Freeman, Al Golden, Max Bulla, all those guys, Al Washington as well. But from what I've gathered, it was the conversations with Kingston Viliamu-Asa, a guy you guys really like from last year's cycle. those conversations have been extremely impactful for him and really are moving the needle and tipping the scales in terms of where things stand with the Fighting Irish. So Texas remains a major threat in this one. You can't obviously write off USC. It's essentially right there in his backyard, but I like Notre Dame. I think they're going to land him.
Notre Dame's linebacking core going to be pretty salty. Love Vili Amuasa. Ironically enough, people on here, I know what's coming here. Drake Bowen, good player. Believe it or not, we still really like him. So you add a guy like Madden Faremo. Drew, just your thoughts in terms of what Marcus Freeman has been able to do really kind of at that second and first level for Notre Dame.
Well, I was going to say the third level of the defense. I love the DB class: Mark Zachary, Ivan Taylor, Dallas Golden, and you're following it up with one of the more violent linebackers in the class potentially. These are the type of dudes that Marcus Freeman needs to land. And I haven't spent much time around Madden. I don't know much of the backstory to me, but seems like a Notre Dame type of kid. Got to get it across the finish line. I think it would be a monster addition for them potentially.
Feels like every show we're kind of talking about Notre Dame, the job that they do in terms of talent identification, getting guys to campus, obviously official visits, and they seem buttoned up on all levels when it comes to the scouting process and obviously the courting process as well. So we'll see what happens with Madden Faremo. A couple more obstacles left.
One more question on Notre Dame commits, putting Tom on the spot here. Ivan Taylor, surprise a visit over the weekend to Alabama. One of our top-ranked safeties, son of Ike Taylor. Anything to know there?
Absolutely. Keep an eye on the Crimson Tide. He was just there, had a great visit, but he does go to Notre Dame this weekend. And I actually reported a couple days ago that he's going to Michigan next weekend. So, again, Marcus Freeman for a long time had this no official visit policy if you're committed, but that's just not a thing anymore. And they know that they can't really enforce that too strongly, especially with the top tier prospects when NIL's in play and all these things. So Ivan Taylor visited Alabama. Like I said, he's got Notre Dame this weekend, Michigan next weekend. That one is far from a done deal, but Notre Dame's hopeful that they can get him to completely shut it down this weekend. But ever since Chris O'Leary left and he went to the NFL, that really shook things up for him and Jadon Blair. They're just clawing, trying to keep Taylor, trying to get Blair. We'll see what happens.
Drew, does anybody play more roster defense with their current class of committed players in Notre Dame? I mean, I just, guys that are constantly just kind of being hit on consistently, and it goes back to the point that I just made that they've done a really good job in the early ID process. They get these guys locked up. We saw that with Ivan Taylor. We've seen that with a couple other guys. But it just seems like Marcus Freeman is constantly just kind of trying to extend his arm out and maybe, extend a stiff arm to a couple other programs that are trying to get aggressive.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like when it comes to the Blue Bloods or the P5 programs, P4, excuse me, maybe there's some G5s out there that consistently get rated, the ones that are really good evaluators. We saw it at Tulane when Fritz was there, but you're right. And I think the thing is, though, Notre Dame, it's kind of like they just got to get through July, and maybe Tom would know that better than me. Like they get through July, and then there's really not a ton of attrition in those fall months leading up to the early signing period. Whereas you look at it like a school like Florida, I mean, what did they lose in November, late October, right into the early signing day? It seems like Notre Dame, their biggest, that's kind of the, not the finish line. Like what's before a finish line? Like that's when you're running a 5K and you get to 3 miles and you got the final 0.2 left.
Yeah, you're asking the wrong dude there. I'm not the 5K guy, so I'm glad you were able to kind of bring that home. Tom, last question before we get you out of here. This comes from Jarrett McDonald, which, guys, I will encourage you. If you have questions, make sure to submit those in the chat if you're on X. Also, if you're on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, make sure to like and subscribe. You can submit questions there as well. We appreciate your support. This came before the show from Jarrett McDonald. He says, where do y'all think Tennessee stands with 5-star offensive tackle Josh Petty?
I would say that Tennessee is in a much better shot after this last visit to campus than they were before. So from everything I've gathered, Tennessee moved the needle, and they are absolutely cemented as a major contender and really like a top-tier finalist for Josh Petty. So the other ones you want to watch are, obviously we've talked about Stanford in the past. Florida State's got a crystal ball pick in favor of them. Georgia Tech's probably the team to beat in state. So watch out for all those schools. But, George McIntyre pushing really, really hard to get him to be his offensive tackle there at Tennessee. So Tennessee, very, very much in play. It'll be interesting to see how things move forward between the Vols and Petty.
Tom Loy, one of the best in the business. We appreciate you stopping by every Wednesday like he does. And Tom Loy, even though he will not be with us on video, we'll be in the chat taking your questions as well. So I know you guys have a lot of questions right now. It's official visit season. You want to know where guys are trending, where guys are leaning. Tom Loy will be in the chat answering questions. Tom, appreciate you stopping by, my friend.
Thanks, fellas.
All right, guys, just a reminder, every Tuesday and Wednesday, you can find the Oyster Boys, Andrew Ivins, Cooper Petagna, right here on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, noon Eastern time. All the coverage that you need, college football recruiting year-around, 365 days. Drew, I don't think we've missed an episode. I think maybe you've missed maybe 2 episodes since we've started doing this thing. Tip of the cap to you, my friend. Just wanted to, I don't know why that came top of mind, but, proud of the product here. But Drew, a couple recent commitments, and, I tweeted it out last night when it came across my timeline, but you've whenever I think Talon Taylor, I think of you. This is a guy that you have long been a fan of, the talented receiver out of Illinois, top 100 player, number 13 receiver in the country. We talked about him a little bit yesterday, coming off a very strong performance in Tampa at the OT7 finals. Well, he committed to Georgia in the Bulldogs as well. Drew, we knew this one was kind of trending this direction, as Tom had alluded to in the past. But now that it's finally over the finish line, just tell us about what you think about the fit of Talon Taylor in Athens.
I love it. I think he's the Z that you can move around pre-snap and that pro-style attack. We'll see how Georgia rounds out this receiver class, but potentially pairing him with like a Travis Smith Jr., who's more of an X. Talon Taylor, Coop, I dug back into the tape last night after he committed. He is a snappy route runner. We've said it, dynamic, explosive. He has urgency, plenty of juice, whatever term you want to use to describe him as a route runner. OT7, he was awesome. The ball skills are there. Kind of a wiry frame, injured his knee as a junior. So there's some questions maybe about the durability, but this is a big pickup for the Bulldogs. Some other thoughts just on this. Think about all the coaching turnover that has happened there in Athens with the wide receivers. And James Coley's the one that gets credit for the commitment here, but I think it's a testament to Georgia's operation and setup. I was talking with Talon's mom over the weekend. She's like, yeah, it was one coach, another coach, but every time we're there, they know who we are. And I went back and I looked, Cooper, Talon Taylor, camped for the Bulldogs last year, worked out for them. I think that's notable because also Zayden Walker, the 5-star linebacker who committed to them last week, the day before his official visit, he's in Athens working out and testing for Kirby Smart. I would bet on that kid panning out for them. Todd Robinson, the athlete who also committed, worked out for Georgia. In this era of NIL and all that stuff, Georgia finds the guys that want to be in that building and they want to compete. And I think that's so notable, but I love the pickup for Georgia. And on top of all this, hey, I think those wide receiver dominoes are starting to fall. Talon Taylor was going to consider, or I think he had an official visit penciled in to Ohio State. Well, he shut it down. He's going to play for Georgia.
I think you bring up a great point. We've talked about it before. We had Cortez Hankton, co-OC, LSU receivers coach at Georgia. He brought up the importance of camp. Certain guys that, came across his radar that they were able to kind of pin down and hit on big. But Drew, I think you and I both know, obviously, well connected in Athens in certain areas, but those guys do a phenomenal job just in terms of a program. We talked about this with Mike Elko and Texas A&M and how they still have a very much kind of Duke type of flavor to them. And what I mean by that, you can see that they are extensive in their research and very diligent. Georgia's the same way. You mentioned getting these guys to camp, working them out. It gives them the conviction to be able to pull the trigger on a guy like Todd Robinson that they have to do their due diligence on in state. Is he a running back? Is he a safety? Well, now you can answer those questions when you have those guys in person. Same with Zayden Walker. Same with a lot of these guys. The linebacker that's picking up all the steam out of Fife in Alabama, right? Same deal. Getting Logan these guys Anderson to camp. Logan Anderson, being able to work them out. And really what it allows is, yeah, you get a feel for the person a little bit, but you get a vision of the player. I mean, our job's hard enough as it is to be able to look at huddle tape, to be able to look at UC tape, trying to splice it together, put the puzzle pieces together. The big thing that kind of puts it over the top is you coming back from OT7 or us coming back from a UA Next camp or us coming back from an All-American Bowl. It helps us to finally say, all right, yeah, I was here. Like you just talked about that 5K. Yeah, maybe I was 3/4 of the way through. Now I feel so good, about the way that I think about the player because I had that additional supplementary data point. So Georgia, I think a lot of people, once you get to a certain rarefied air, it's easy to take your foot off the gas pedal. They keep the main thing, and that kind of shows up in the recruiting. I think a lot of people, and this happened with Nick Saban, a lot of people just take elite level recruiting for granted. Like it's not one of those things you just snap your fingers, you look at the rankings and you get these guys committed and all is said and done and they develop into first round draft picks. Like there is a lot of work that goes into it. And sure, they've positioned themselves, put themselves in a great place to be able to capitalize on these type of guys. But the type of decisions that they're making are very different than everybody else. You're trying to figure out ultimately at the end of the day, my fourth linebacker on the board versus my fifth linebacker on the board. And guess what? Those 5 linebackers are probably 5 of the best linebackers in the country, right? It's a little bit different. Same goes for the tight end position as well. So a lot of love there. Drew, Oregon, speaking of Georgia and Kirby Smart disciples, Dan Lanning knows a little thing or two about adding some size, and he has done that. Alik Terry, offensive line coach out in Eugene. Big week for the boys in the Ducks. Dimitri Manning, the next name to jump in the fold out of Bellevue, Washington. And Drew, we talk about it all the time. We talk about mass. We talk about thick lower trunk. I am telling you, in my 3 years here at 24/7 Sports, I don't think I've seen a bigger lower half than Dimitri Manning. 6'6.5", 345 pounds. I think the idea would probably be to start him at tackle, but I can see him playing guard. You have one of these body types who is a better than average athlete in the Pacific Northwest, you pounce. You just pull the trigger and you figure it out later. That's kind of my big takeaway with Dimitri Manning. And you pair him up with a guy like Zaire Addison, who we think's got some versatility as well. It's been a really good week on the offensive line for Oregon.
Yeah, I think Oregon's where are they in their recruiting rankings? Look that up. I'm a big Dimitri Manning fan, like West Coast kid. Green numbers are what put him on my radar. We moved him from that tackle projection to the IOL projection. I thought this was a kid that was going to end up at Miami. I thought he had Mario Cristobal written all over him. But Oregon, it seems like Dan Lanning is trying to follow and copy that path of what Kirby Smart has done there at Georgia. Last year, the Bulldogs signed one of the heaviest offensive line classes ever. Oregon's kind of quietly doing it themselves with Dimitri Manning this cycle. How about Jaquan McCroy last cycle, who is a specimen, enormous mammoth of a human? I mean, those two guys, you could potentially have them on the left or right side, and they're going to open up plenty of running lanes there in the Big Ten. You said it, Zaire Addison, guy that we think can play 4 or 5 spots potentially at the next level. I know they just have 2 offensive line commits. I'm excited to see how the rest of this group comes together for the Ducks when it comes to talking about that offensive line. We know they're going to get skill talent. We know they're going to get some playmakers on the defensive side of the ball, but in the trenches, I really, really like what they're doing.
Oregon up to number 20. Drew, I know you asked for that in the 24/7 Sports composite team rankings. We got some, questions earlier, I think, in the year, which it just goes to show. I think some people are like, hey, what's going on with this Oregon class? Man, when you're 8-9 months out, whatever it is, and I know that was a couple months ago, like there's some guys that I think have just earned the cachet to say, like, listen, they're on it. We know we're on it. It's just a matter of time. That's kind of where I feel with Oregon right now in recruiting.
Panic meter at like 0. just remember, Dan Lanning's the one on signing day, always puffing the cigar in his office. They've produced fireworks every signing period.
How about this from our guy, Andrew, who's a huge Oregon fan? He says Shaq McCroy and Dimitri Manning playing next to each other would block out the sun. That is true. Shaquan McCroy coming over from Clay Chalkville last year, big human being. Dimitri Manning, big human being. It's got a very Georgia type feel. Oregon's one of those teams, Drew, like I could see them getting their hands on some hardware sooner rather than later. I don't think this is like a 3-year deal. I think this could happen in the next 1 to 2 years. So pretty fascinated to see how Oregon lines up with the big boys. I don't think they're going to have a problem at all. So Oregon getting it done. Another name popping today, Jaden Lofton from New Jersey, number 23 edge in the country, committed to Tennessee on Wednesday. Sneaky one here. 6'4", 240 pounds, Drew. I think sometime in the last month, correct me if I'm wrong, we bumped him up to a 90. Hudson Standish saw him at the UA Next camp there in New Jersey, like what he saw. We went back, revisited the tape. A lot of tools here, Drew, and this is kind of a crafty pickup out of New Jersey. It seems like a lot of teams are just kind of going up to New Jersey and getting their hands on whatever they can find. Some players up there.
Yeah, and credit to Hudson Standish here. He kept bugging me about, hey, have you watched Jaden Lofton yet? Have you watched Jaden Lofton yet? Young for his grade, tested exceptionally well, looked the part, top performer at that Under Armour camp there in New Jersey. To me, Tennessee, I mean, if this is kind of like the middle of the class for them, then it's going to be a really, really good group. And every time I feel like I talk about Tennessee in a defensive take, it's like, okay, I can picture this guy being in the 2 deep in the SEC. I think what's different with Jaden Lofton, that developmental upside, I think he has plenty to unlock. Love the traits. And he's a guy that you stash on the roster, see what he looks like 2 to 3 years down the line. Rare for the Vols to be up in the Garden State. I can't remember, maybe the last time there, Jared Garantano, the quarterback, was maybe the last time they were up there. Like the pickup for them. I think it makes a ton of sense.
I know we got a question. I got to look back in the chat, but believe it was Jared again was asking about the potential of a guy like Jaden Lofton potentially moving up in the rankings, and also concerned about, since he's from New Jersey, is there a potential chance that he would move down in the rankings? And Jared, I thought that was funny. So I went and I looked it up. I looked up New Jersey right now. New Jersey's got 7 players in the top 247. Would love to see kind of what that looks like year over year, but there's other guys outside, Talibi Kaba, Jaden Lofton, Kamar Archie, Cameron Miller committed to Wisconsin, guys that we like a lot. Marcus Upton committed to Syracuse, Deshaun Stewart as well. Drew, I don't know. This is just off the cuff, but it seems to be a pretty talented year in New Jersey.
Yeah, I would echo that. And I mean, I think he's a player where the arrow is pointing up. It's hard for me to see him falling down after we got that live exposure. And I want to recall, I don't have my notes up on Lofton. I don't think he has played a ton on Friday nights. But again, I like the idea of him and what he could be. I also think he could potentially, slide him inside depending on how he fills out over the next few years.
So there you have it. Georgia, Oregon, Tennessee, all getting some commitments on Tuesday and Wednesday. Big pickups for those schools, and big week ahead for 24/7 Sports, and a couple different reasons why. But the Elite 11 finals will be kicking off next week, and we'll have some content out on Monday. We'll be sitting down with Brian Stump, the guy that leads the Elite 11 finals, Elite 11 regionals, just does a phenomenal job. Him and his staff, Andrew and I, will sit down with him, preview the Elite 11 finals out there in California. And Drew, myself, Tom Loy, Greg Biggins, Player Angulo, and the rest of the team will have all the coverage you need for 24/7 Sports. So make sure to stay locked in. I know we're getting a lot of questions about how these quarterbacks are going to stack up against each other. We'll have it all next weekend. Also, how about this? 24/7 Sports has just hit 400,000 subscribers. Guys, we appreciate you. Couldn't do it without you. Make sure to pat yourself on the back. That's a big milestone. And shout out to everybody on the production team, the people that you don't see behind the scenes: Chris Belcher, Aaron Grisham, Sonley, producer as well. So many other names that not going to get to and be able to thank, but all have a part in this. So, guys, we appreciate you obviously being able to make this happen. All right, we're not done yet. We told you that we are going to talk about Chris Hummer's top 100 list, true freshman impact top 100 list. And Drew, I love these lists. You do them all the time. You got the freak list. You got a bunch of other things, Dream Team, OT7 finals. But this was fun. I enjoyed this. So much of this is what I like, is that we do the scouting on the front end of the high school Chris kind of does the initial impressions of what these coaches kind of think spring wise, who are some of the guys standing out, who are some of the guys that might have to play early. So his is not so much through a scouting lens, but it's so much more through a sourcing lens, which I really like. And I think just my initial takeaway was, wow, the guys that showed up on this list, I feel pretty good about at least how we evaluated them coming out of high school.
It's like a report card, but like a week into the process, really. I mean, of these careers, if you kind of stretch them out. So yeah, I mean, some of them are always going to be a longer burn, but I don't know. I think me and you probably geek out more than anyone else when going through the list because we recognize every single name on there aside from like one or two. I thought the amount of 5 stars, 21 of our 32 5 stars from last cycle were mentioned by Hummer. Now, I don't know how much of an impact me personally, when I kind of saw some of those names, those guys are going to have. But it seems like a few of them could be, freshman All-Americans are going to be relied upon early on in the season.
Yeah, so I almost feel like it would be easier for us to start with the guys that weren't named, right? You talked about 21 of the 32 that were named. There's a significant amount of these guys that we expect to have potential impact as freshmen. What does that look like? All to varying degrees. The guys that weren't named, Drew, here they are. Jordan Ross to Tennessee, the 5-star edge rusher. Justin Williams, Chris Cole, the 2 backers at Georgia. Justin Scott at Miami. David Stone at Oklahoma. Don McKinley at LSU. Elijah Rushing, Gatlin Bear at Oregon. And Luke Reynolds at Penn State. Was there one or two names where you're like, Chris, I don't know. I think that guy's going to have to play early.
Well, let's see. Tennessee, Jordan Ross is kind of in a room that also includes James Pierce. Georgia, the linebackers, it's hard for them to play. David Stone at Oklahoma, that was one that jumped out to me because he had Jaden Jackson, David Stone's high school teammate, on there. Don McKinley, kind of the other at LSU. We've talked about them needing big bodies. I don't think me and you think he's ready to go day one, but they might not have a choice for him to be part of the rotation. I don't know. Anyone else jump out to you? Justin Scott at Miami, but then you think about the Hurricanes, how much they've invested in the trenches, more specifically so in the middle via the transfer portal. I don't know. All these guys, I think, just kind of circumstantial with where they are.
Yeah, I think you put it the correct way there in terms of circumstance. I think Jordan Ross steps into a great situation. A lot of that has to do with James Pierce. But Jordan Ross, we talk about these guys kind of uptick coming off of their senior seasons. That was Jordan Ross. I thought he was playing his best football second half of his senior year. He showed up, Under Armour All-American game, continued to kind of show that he was trending in the right direction. He might kind of be at the right the right point of his kind of physical maturation where he should be able to give Tennessee some snaps, especially off the edge. I mean, yeah, James Pierce is a nightmare. He's going to create a lot of attention. But even if you got a guy right now who maybe still has to grow into what he's going to be in terms of playing the run, but can give you some snaps as an elite pass rusher, I think Jordan Ross should be able to play. I agree with you on the young backers. I think Georgia does a good job kind of getting those guys' feet wet, and then you start to see them more and more in the second half of the season. But I agree. That's kind of what happened with C.J. Allen. The 2 other ones, Drew, you make a great point. The 3 defensive linemen, I think all 3 of those dudes are going to play. Just how deep you have to be in the trenches. I think the other thing is, the game within the game. Can you afford to sit those dudes? Justin Scott, David Stone, Don McKinley, all 3 of those guys, at least in my mind, pretty sure all 3 of those guys got paid handsomely, right? So to keep those guys interested, to keep them in the boat, I think you got to find a way to get those guys reps. The one guy that I feel the best about is Don McKinley at LSU, because you said it. LSU is just kind of razor thin. Don McKinley might not be ready, but they need the body, so I think he's going to play.
I think what also stands out about those 3, all 3 of them look good in the all-star setting, right? Whether it be in San Antonio at the All-American Bowl or in Orlando at the Under Armour game. Like, I'm not saying they were the alphas every single day, but there were certainly flashes where you're like, okay, I think they are maybe a little ahead of the curve, might not be a huge adjustment when they get on campus. That's what I'll say. I mean, because sometimes we get kids in those all-star settings and it's like a deer in the headlight. It's like, whoa, all right, this is going to be, 1 or 2 developmental years. We still love the long-term outlook. I think I came out of there with Don McKinley, who has been described as like a timid individual. I didn't see any of that in Orlando. And then Justin Scott, he made it very difficult for the other team to practice at times.
Yeah, Don McKinley is interesting because we heard that going into that week, and then I guess when he, strapped up the helmet, it's a completely different beast. We saw a different guy than what had been described. The 3 other guys, Rushing, Bear, Luke Reynolds, can totally see it. I think all 3 of those guys, obviously Gatlin Bear going on the mission, Elijah Rushing's one of those guys going to need a year in the weight room. Luke Reynolds, kind of one of those guys as well. I could see him maybe a little situationally, but in a position that he can sit at Penn State and develop. All right, Drew, the good thing about this list that you can find on 247sports.com, shout out to our friend Chris Hummer, a lot of names here and a lot of guys that I think kind of get the mind going a little bit when you hear like the spring practice reports and this guy's turning heads and this guy did this. And for you and I, every day kind of seems like we're kind of drinking through a fire hose a little bit. So I don't know about you, but some of the names that kind of came up, I was like, whoa, I didn't know that this guy was, out there kind of making some noise during the spring, but maybe some names that kind of stood out to you that you had some connections to throughout the evaluation process.
Jaden Baugh, running back at Florida. We had him as an athlete, one-time Arkansas commit. I know some schools, I think Georgia had him on their linebacker board. Probably going to kick myself for not getting him a 4th star based on what we saw this spring, but I think he fits Billy Napier's offense, what they want to do. Kind of my player comp behind the scenes for Jaden Baugh has been Raheem Sanders, Rocket Sanders. I think there's a ton of similarities. Big back, has a top-end gear, can pull away from defenses. Billy likes to use multiple ball carriers, committee-type role. I think Jaden Baugh is a name that will be on the field getting touches in 2024. So he was one that jumped out. 2 receivers for me, Cooper. Mario Craver at Mississippi State. I think this makes a ton of sense. There's been a ton of turnover, attrition there. Jeff Levy coming in. They want to go wide open spread attack. I think he's the guy that can give you some snaps right away in the slot. And then finally, Ja'Cory Barney, another high 3-star for us. Out of South Florida, was a big win for the Cornhuskers. Finishes the high 89, highest a 3-star could be. Do we regret maybe not having that 4th star in him? Yeah, it's keeping me up at night right now because he looked really, really good in the Cornhuskers spring game. And Dylan Raiola, Ja'Cory Barney, I think that's a connection that you could hear over the next few years.
I could talk about this segment for maybe another half hour. I love it. I mean, there's so many names on there. We only kind of picked 3, but there are so many names that I was kind of fascinated by to see, like, all right, these guys really going to be able to make an impact early. For me, Drew, how about Ja'Shawn Ridgel, a guy that was committed to South Alabama, out of Alabama, was super fascinating to me, had a legit track and field background, played receiver, played safety, played quarterback, did a little bit of everything. And you'd watch him, and no disrespect to South Alabama. I mean, you got to give credit to Kane Womack at the time. But it was like, man, this just doesn't make sense. How has this guy not been unearthed? And I talked to the guys at Tulane, and they love Ja'Shawn Ridgel. They thought they were going to get him. Didn't happen. That staff ends up at Houston, and they pull the trigger, and they get him there. And you talk about Tulane, we talked about Tulane, Willie Fritz. Now that staff being over in Houston, I just love the job that they do. And I think this kid physically ready to play, physically mature game, and then can help them out on teams too. The name to me that, was a little bit of a surprise. How about PJ Woodland at LSU, out of Mississippi? Saw him at Alabama, Mississippi. Really liked the kid, but he was like 165 pounds soaking wet when I saw him. So for me to hear that he was taking first team and second team reps during the spring was a little bit of surprise. And Drew, a good reminder that, circumstance, LSU in that secondary is kind of razor thin. That's a place that they got to get right under Corey Raymond, and help was on the way. But PJ Woodland's probably going to have to play this year, a guy that we had a high 3-star grade on. And then how about this one, man? Like, I go back and forth. You mentioned Mario Craver. There was some like tight finishes deadline. Like, all right, we're going to go 89. We're going to go 90 here. Mario Craver was one of those guys. I pulled it off. I had him as 89. I saw him at Alabama, Mississippi. It was kind of like good lesson learned. And I'm like, I can't live with it. I'm gonna stick it back on. Cameron Pruitt was one of those guys. We went into Alabama and Mississippi, and I'm like, I'm going to have to see something here for this one to stick. Drew, I love this kid. Like hybrid safety, roll down guy, outside linebacker, will linebacker, can do a lot of different things, kind of a seek and destroy type of player. I love this kid. I think Miami's got something here. He's going to need the weight room, but to hear that he was turning heads early, and I think Chris put in his article that this is the type of dude that they used to have in the early 2000s, it kind of fires me up because it's not just like a height, weight, speed thing. Like, I love this guy's disposition, the way that he plays the game.
What did Hummer write on Ridgel? Because I remember he was one of those quote unquote group of 5 commits we stamped as a 4th star right before the traditional national signing day. Got a ton of pushback on that exercise. But I remember me and you talking about him like just a jumbo mid skill, take him, figure it out later.
Yeah, I just think that that's what it is. Too dynamic of an athlete to kind of keep off the field. And if you're Willie Fritz, where more than likely it's going to be a year where you're just kind of like a foundational year, like let's build the culture. Why not give some of these talented freshmen a run? And it's funny, like the group of 5 exercise. You don't want to like put yourself in a box and say, hey, we got to do this, but there's always going to be guys that transfer up. We've seen that, right? There are good players at the group of 5 level. So if we think that the guys got the goods, regardless of what team they're going to be suiting up for, then we owe it to them. We owe it to ourselves to grade them the way that we kind of see them with everybody else. So, Drew, any final thoughts on Hummer's articles? Any other takeaways there?
I think, the guys we mentioned, Ja'Cory Barney, Ridgel, like if you play Devy leagues, like if you're in a Devy fantasy football, like names on that list, there's some hidden gems in there. And it's fun if you're a college football fan. I think Chris Hummer did an excellent job. And it's like you said, that he's working the college angle, the staffers. I mean, he came to me, I'm sure he came to you just for some kind of feedback on some names. But this is all coming from the other side, which means those individuals are going to play.
Did not come to me. So there you go. DOS priority, man. No, Hummer's great, does a phenomenal job. Obviously, extremely well read, extensive research, and all the feedback that he's gotten here. So make sure to check out his work on 247sports.com. And with that being said, 247sports.com is where you can find wall-to-wall team coverage, recruiting rankings, transfer portal updates, and the great work of Andrew Ivins, Chris Hummer, and the rest of our team at 247 Sports. And also, while I got you, just a quick reminder, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have a question, now's the time to fire it in on the 247 Sports YouTube channel. And Drew, it is time for viewer questions. And let's get right to them. Let's start with this one. Question from Andrew. Could you guys see Jeremiah Smith leading Ohio State in receiving this year? Yes, I could.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You act so surprised every time I kind of give a very convicted take on Jeremiah Smith being the guy. And what's funny? I was reading quotes from some of his teammates, Will Howard included, the other day, and hearing those guys talk about him and what type of player he is, and the fact that he got there early and he rolled in spring. We know what type of dude this is. I expect like the phenomenon of Julio Jones when he was at Alabama. And I remember when Julio Jones arrived there, and a lot of people just saying like, all right, we just got to get this. We got to get this guy on the field. And as somebody who grew up as an LSU fan, I remember Julio Jones as a true freshman running away from Patrick Peterson. That's burnt into my mind. On a screen pass that he took 60+ yards to the house. Point being is, yeah, you look at that receiver room like Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis, Jeremiah Smith. Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate could very well end up being first-round draft picks. The dude that we're talking about here is a different dude. Is different. And what I mean by that is I went back, I watched the tape on Marvin Harrison Jr. coming out of high school. I went back, I did this on Malik Neighbors, recruited Roma Dunze at Washington. They're all really special talents. This guy is in a completely different category. And those are 3 top 10 picks I just talked about. And he's in a really good spot. You know, it's not at one of these spots where I'm like, I don't know, scheme fit. Is he not going to get the ball? Like, I trust it. I trust Ryan Day. I trust her situation. Like, yeah, 100%. I'm all in on this kid.
All right, I don't know how accurate this is, but Ohio State's been playing football for 133 years. And according to this story I pulled up, they've never had a true freshman receiver with over 500 yards receiving. I guess Chris Carter's 1984 freshman season is up for debate. Some places have him close to 600, others have him under 500. Does he get over 600 yards? Yes or no?
I think very quickly he's going to be the belle of the ball there. I think they're going to know who the alpha is by week 3.
Sign me up.
Yeah. So there you go. I mean, we're all in. And it's not one of those things like, oh, we put him at number 1. Like, I mean, the more I hear, the more I watch, the more I like. You know. So, all right, Drew, we got another question, and I think this is a guy. Before I bring him up, Joshua Moore. We just talked about this kid, right? At least behind the scenes.
Yeah, behind the scenes. Yes,
correct?
Last week.
Okay. Andrew and Cooper, do y'all have any thoughts on Joshua Moore and what you need to see to move him into that 4-star top 247 range?
Yeah, I mean, we just moved him up from an 88 to an 89. Kid that impressed at the Under Armour camp back in Miami. You know, I keep bringing it up. Hard to stack this wide receiver board. Was hoping we would get some spring footage from him in the jamboree or whatnot. I couldn't find any, Coop. I don't know if you could find any. You know, I think he's a prototypical X. I think the question that's going to come on Saturdays and at the next level, all right, can he separate against really good cornerbacks? Like, I think that is certainly a question mark with him. Someone we're going to track as a senior, Wes Broward. Since I've been doing this, I don't think they've ever had a P4 recruit. With that being said, 2 years ago in his spring jamboree, you know, I think his team faced Chaminade and Cardinal Gibbons, and he went off for some big plays. So, you know, that 89 designation, like those are guys that are in that conversation for a 4-star. We're going back and forth, and I don't know if it's going to be decided until the end of the cycle after we get those senior seasons. I like him. I think he can be a player on Saturdays for sure, just not sold yet on the Sunday upside.
Yeah, he's one to me. It's not a clean comp, but I kind of brought up Jawan Johnson, you know, who's really, really talented receiver coming out. He's now a tight end with the Saints. Really didn't know what his home was. Like, big physical frame. Is he a receiver? Is he a tight end? He's become a nice pass catching option at the NFL level for the Saints. And Joshua Moore, to me, I mean, 6'4", 205, big frame kid. Drew, the tape was just okay. The combine exposure was kind of like, whoa. So anytime you have that, whether it's super productive tape and maybe a little bit of a lull on the combine side, or, hey, this guy from a combine standpoint, what I mean combine, like, I'm not just looking at metrics with combine. Like, I thought this guy performed admirably when we saw him in some of the competitive one-on-ones. Like, there's some physical juice there with Joshua Moore. I think he's just kind of got to find his fit on the field. And what's that going to be? He's the perfect 89. And there shouldn't be really any panic around him. Like, he's the type of guy that I think the rest of the team, super, super excited to kind of see what this senior year looks like. And if he can put it together, I think easily can get in that conversation, because he's got all the right stuff. He's just got to put it on tape consistently.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's a question here. I'll try to divulge this as best as possible. Benjamin Corbin says, what's the process to have better updates for G5 commits? Are people able to apply to be a contributor to better have commit updates reflected for G5 or lower P4 commits? Great question. I think this has more to do, Drew, if I'm reading it right, in terms of like the turnaround time to get these guys graded. And if that is the case, Benjamin, those are all things that we're talking about behind the scenes. We're trying to be more efficient with everything that we're doing. You know, I know there's been a lot of questions about Liberty commits and all those type of things. Like, somebody was asking about Liberty, and they had the highest ranked recruiting class and, you know, group of, to me, if you're talking about Liberty and where they are, and I'm just using them as an example, but if you're talking about those guys in June That's a good thing. That means we got grades on the majority of those guys, maybe one or two withstanding that need to get eyes on. But there is a lot of volume of players that need to be graded. And we have a team of 5-6 people, and we're very fortunate to have, and we have some incredible resources here at 24/7. So all things, I would say, ironically, in the last 2 months, we've been able to see a huge uptick in efficiency on just grading, yes, not only second tier Power 4 players, but group of 5 players as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we're grading as fast as ever. I mean, for every 10 commits, I think only like one of them is ungraded. I take pride in our group of 5 rankings. I think we do an excellent job. And I think it's so important right now, just with the players that are transferring up. And I also think with the transfer portal, these group of 5 classes, they are getting access to athletes that maybe in the past were going to go low end Power 4 and end up at one of those programs. Like we consistently last cycle, I mean, like me and Gabe Brooks and Hudson Standish were texting all the time, like, whoa, this group of 5 recruiting class, like I think a lot of, P4 programs would like this class. You're seeing programs with traits. Liberty's one that you brought up there, Cooper. So we're on it. I think, if you're a fan of one of those programs out there and you're like, okay, well, we just had this huge weekend. They haven't graded these guys yet. I'm just going to say this, like, give us the time to do it the right way instead of, just slapping some type of grade on there. Because, I think in the past and previously in this industry, it was like, okay, this kid's headed to this program. This program isn't good. All right, we're going to make him a 2-star. And, we have graded some group of 5 commits extremely high, and they've ended up flipping and making plays at the Power 4 level as true freshmen. Eric Singleton is a prime example. He was an 88 for us, committed to Western Kentucky, flips to Georgia Tech, and I think he was an ACC freshman all ACC. So, it's a priority. I mean, there is like a tab that we use in our database on NextGen that is just devoted to the group of 5 guys. We recognize them. We're doing our job the best we can with those guys.
Oh, it's a great question because, what's great about it is, what we call our discussion board. So basically players that, we want to get multiple eyes on. But when you see guys like Contavious Richardson committed to Georgia State, and he's a two-way guy, and he plays quarterback, and he's got a elite track and field background, and you're like, and this guy's at Georgia State. Some of my favorite things is kind of watch, and Drew and I were actually talking about it this morning, not even group of 5 and no disrespect, but the way that we've been able to kind of orchestrate things, we're getting a lot better grasp on the big picture of what teams are doing outside of the top 247. And I think for us, that gives us great clarity of kind of what's happening outside of just the top 25 teams. So great question. Definitely something that we're trying to improve. Drew, that's about it, man. Anything before we kind of leave for the weekend? Any players on your mind? Any guys that you're like, hey, did you see that guy? Anything interesting for us? Any last thoughts, I guess, before we head off to California on Monday as well?
All right, here's a question I have for you. I thought the official visit photo shoots were done. When does that go into effect? Or you can only do it on official visits?
Are they back?
I don't know. I've seen some. I want to give a shout out to Florida Atlantic. Do you see those pictures they did on their official visit? They're like on the beach. Awesome. And then North Carolina, you got Bryce Baker on his visit, like holding a baby goat. Like, where did they get that? I mean, I know everyone's still doing like the I think UCF had some of those Tesla trucks, and we get the Lamborghinis and all that stuff. I like the creativity. All right. FAU's like, we're 1.2 miles from the beach. All right, we're going to go on the beach, get you in the water in a uniform. And then the baby goat, I mean, that is something else.
Does any of that stuff bother you at all? No, I'm not talking, I mean, like that was part of the conversation last week on social media, but I don't know. I just kind of feel like,
okay, well, now you're going to really get me. Now you're really going to get me going. Look, I think changes are coming because I've heard some feedback with like some high-profile recruits that are out on the road, and they're like, "Oh, this school, they messed up the visit." What do you mean they messed up the visit? Do you want to get paid? Are you a professional athlete, or do you want to get recruited? Because I don't think you can do both. Am I wrong? NFL team drafts you, are they going to make sure your mom got the right dinner? You got
it's
steak
not the
instead of
NFL
salmon?
yet.
Okay, I'm
know.
just saying that change is
It's
coming.
it's heading that way. You're right about that, but it's not, And I think you bring up a good point. I think you always bring up, like, I think more of these visits are slowly, I don't know. I haven't seen much evidence of it, but maybe in 5 years, maybe 10 years, these visits start looking like top 30 visits, in the NFL draft, where it's like, yeah, you bring your parents, and there's no photo shoots. We're going to get you on a whiteboard. It's more of an interview, and we're going to take you to dinner, and we're going to see if you're a fit. It's not going to be one of these things where we're going to have, ice sculptures and, whatever car you fancy or anything like that. So I don't know. It's hard to kind of like keep a pulse on generally overall. Like, like, I don't know, the rule, like, did it go away? Is it here to stay? Like, what do we, that's just kind of the current state of where we are. So, guys, we appreciate you joining us as always. And like I said earlier in the show, 400,000 subscribers to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. That is a big accomplishment. We couldn't do it without you. And for I should say, for more, go to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Make sure we can keep up that great work. Make sure to like and subscribe as well. And remember, one last time, the Elite 11 coverage will start next week. Drew and I, Tom Lloyd, Greg Biggins, Blair Angulo will be holding it down from beautiful California. We can't wait to bring you all the best news and coverage from that week, a great week at the Elite 11 finals in LA. So for Tom Lloyd, Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna. Guys, we appreciate you stopping by. Have a great rest of your week. We'll see you next Tuesday.